right, hello everybody. This is Brian Hong of AASHTO. Welcome to the second of 6 TAM webinars being sponsored by the FHWA TAM Expert Task Group. So the topic of today's webinar is Transportation Asset Management 101 for MPOs. There will be more webinars sponsored by the TAM ETG on the topic of lifecycle cost analysis, cross-asset allocation, and integrating asset management into an agency's processes. And for more information on this webinar series or to register, visit tam.transportation.org and click Webinars. So you will find archives of many other webinars, and shortly, video and slides from today's webinar will be posted on the site. And so again, the address is tam.transportation.org and click Webinars. You can also link to this page from FHWA's Asset Management page. So before we go further, I also want to plug our new LinkedIn group called Transportation Asset Management. So Matt Halberg of Iowa DOT set this up, and we encourage all of you to join up today. And finally, if you have any questions for the presenters during today's webinar, please submit your comments or questions using the webinar's Q&A feature. And so just some logistics about our audio. We've entered the webinar into lecture mode, and so you will be muted by default, and so only the presenter will be audible. So presenters should be sure to use their phone's mute buttons to unmute their phones in order to be heard. And so with that, I will turn it over to Chris Evilla of the Waco Metropolitan Planning Organization, and who is a member of the Transportation Asset Management Expert Task Group.
Well, thank you, Brian, and good afternoon. And for those of you on the West Coast, Alaska, or Hawaii, good morning. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the TAM ETG to this webinar on TAM 101, which is specifically geared towards metropolitan planning organizations. And the TAM ETG is also pleased to sponsor this webinar. And since 2012, the Federal Highway Administration and AASHTO have been hosting webinars of this type to provide an opportunity to connect with the asset management community and to bring people together around a series of important topics. And we believe that sharing knowledge of this type is a critical component in advancing the practice of asset management. If we go to the third slide, we will be introducing each of the speakers before each presentation, but just briefly, I do want to introduce who will be talking today. Our first presentation we'll be hearing from Francine Whitson and Spencer Stevens of the Federal Highway Administration. And they're going to talk about MAP 21, what it means for MPOs, and more specifically, they'll be covering the asset management requirements out of MAP 21. From there, we'll move on to our first MPO speaker, who is Benjamin Brackett from the Puget Sound Regional Council. That is the MPO for the Seattle-Tacoma area. Our second MPO will be Jeffrey Neal from the North Central Texas Council of Governments, which is the MPO for the Dallas-Fort Worth region. And then our third MPO is represented by Kathy Sarli from the Northeast Ohio Area-Wide Coordinating Agency, and they are the MPO for the Cleveland, Ohio area. At the very end, we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers. And just as another reminder, if you do have any comments or questions, please use the chat feature on the webinar. And please feel free to use that at any point during the presentations, although recognize that the presenters themselves may not be able to respond until the end of the webinar. So if we go on to the next slide here, the Transportation Asset Management Expert Task Group, which formed to provide a forum to discuss changes in the way highway agencies are managing assets. The structure and membership of the Expert Task Group was intentionally designed to ensure interaction with key AASHTO and Transportation Research Board committees. The activities of the TAM ETG include identifying strategies for advancing management practices and influencing change within state DOTs, and partnering with transportation agencies by addressing gaps in the framework, roles and responsibilities, drivers' tools, and or workforce skills. The ETG also provides input to both the Federal Highway Administration, AASHTO, the Transportation Research Board regarding direction, definitions, processes, tools, and any templates associated with the implementation of state and local transportation asset management plans. And then finally, the ETG is also involved in developing and implementing a plan for communicating our work to the larger transportation community. We do want to mention that the ETG does meet in person about twice a year, and the next meeting is scheduled for October of this year in St. Paul, Minnesota. Those meetings are open to the public, and if you do have an interest in attending or participating, please contact Matt Hardy at AASHTO at mhardy@ashto.org. So if we move on to the next slide, we do want to just mention that the current membership of the ETG does include a number of public sector representatives representing federal, state, and local agencies. And we are developing a number of products, including this webinar series, of which this is number 2 in 6, that will be presented through January of next year. If you do want some more information on the expert task group, you can access that information via the Federal Highway Administration website at www.fhwa.dot.gov/asset/ETG. So if we go on to the next slide, I mentioned that there are 6 webinars being sponsored by the TAM ETG through January of next year. Today's is focusing on metropolitan planning organizations, and the previous one we had was on target setting. The other 4 webinars that will be presented briefly will have the first part of network life cycle cost analysis coming up on July 8th. Part 2 of that will be on September 9th. In November, we'll have a webinar on optimization and cross-asset allocation. Stay tuned on that date. November 11th does happen to be a federal holiday, so stay tuned for that one. And then finally, on January 13th, we will be wrapping up this webinar series on integrating TAM into agencies' processes. So with that overview, what I'd like to do now is to begin introducing our speakers, and then hand it over to our first speaker, who will be Ms. Francine Whitson. She leads the TPM programs team in FHWA's Office of Transportation Performance Management, and she's been doing that since September 2011. The TPM programs team leads the Federal Highway Administration in the development of policies, guidance, and regulations related to the newly authorized performance-based FHWA program. She previously led the Evaluation and Economic Investment team in the FHWA's Office of Asset Management that focused on the development and communication of the precepts and principles of transportation asset management, and formulating and advancing the application of engineering economic analyses tools. Ms. Whitson has also served as the Assistant Division Administrator in the Maryland Division Office and as the County Highway Engineer in Charles County, Maryland. She is a graduate of the University of Maryland, College Park, and Georgetown University. And then she's tag teaming with her partner, who is, just a second here, I had it here, Spencer Stevens. Mr. Stevens is the acting team leader for the Federal Highway Administration Office of Planning Oversight and Stewardship in Washington, D.C. His duties include planning and environmental linkages, freight transportation planning for FHWA, coordinating homeland security linkages to transportation planning, planning liaison relationships with the states of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, Delaware, Maryland, and Michigan, and overall implementation of MAP 21 and the planning regulations. Mr. Stevens has been with FHWA since graduating from the University of New Hampshire in June of 1990 with a Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering, and has worked in various FHWA offices throughout the country. Prior to joining the Office of Planning, Mr. Stevens was the Transportation Planning Team Leader for the FHWA Pennsylvania Division Office in Harrisburg. And in a prior assignment, Mr. Stevens was a member of the joint FTA-FHWA Metropolitan Office in Los Angeles, where he covered transportation planning in Southern California for both FHWA and FTA. He and his family both currently live in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And with that, let me hand that over to Francine and Mr. Stevens. Thanks.
Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? My name is Francine Whitson. I'm with the Office of Transportation Performance Management, and Spencer Stevens will be joining me in providing a very high-level presentation on the common themes and requirements in MAP 21 and in the MPRMs that we have already published. We're not going to get into all the details of the MPRMs, but we just wanted to give you a quick overview, and we recommend that you do review each MPRM in detail to identify issues that's going to be unique to the area. So the first thing we thought it might be good would be going over what the current schedule is for publishing the MPRM. As you can see on your web, the safety performance measures and for both the Highway HSIP program and the performance measures were both published last year. We are looking for final rules for the performance measures in September, for the HSIP program in August of this year. And then for the planning rule, which was published in June, we're looking also for that to be in final rule status in September of this year. The payment and bridge performance measures notice proposed rulemaking just recently closed last Friday, and so we are busy looking at those comments. And then Highway Asset Management Plan, it opened in February, and that will be closing at the end of this month on May 29th. For the system performance measures, and that includes the measures for performance of the interstate and non-NHS interstate, as well as freight movement on the interstate, and the CMAQ performance measures of congestion mitigation, traffic congestion, and on-road mobile source emissions. We are anticipating publishing that particular MPRM in August of this year. Okay, so next slide. So just real quick, we go a little bit about the relationship between planning and performance. MAP 21 does require transition to a performance-driven, outcome-based approaches for federal highway and the transit programs. The planning rule that was proposed provides for implementation of performance management within the planning process. So the basic framework of the planning process is largely untouched. However, it does change the planning process by requiring the states, MPOs, and providers of public transportation to link their investment priorities to the achievement of performance targets, and that's where the link is between performance management and planning. The proposed performance measure rules generally provide the required performance measures in the process for states and MPOs to establish their targets and report on performance. Next slide, please. In the planning rule, MAP 21 introduced a transformational change to increase transparency and accountability. Most significantly, states and MPOs now must take a performance-based approach to planning and programming. They must also link their investment to decision-making to the achievement of the performance targets. Along with this emphasis on performance-based planning and programming, MAP 21 also emphasized the non-metropolitan transportation planning process required by states to have a higher level involvement with the non-metropolitan local officials, and also provided for the optional creation of regional transportation planning organizations. The planning rule would also implement other additions to the metropolitan planning process, and as well as a new MAP 21 framework for programmatic mitigation. Next slide, please. So what you see on this particular slide are the performance measures that we have proposed In the 2 NPRMs that have been published for safety, we've proposed 2 performance measures, as you see here. On the for pavement and bridge performance measure NPRM, there were 6 performance measures that were proposed. As I said, both of these NPRMs have closed, and we are looking at comments on these 2. Next slide. The 3rd NPRM, as I said before, will cover the measures to assess performance of the interstate system, of the non-interstate NHS, of the national freight movement on the interstate system, as well as traffic congestion and all-road mobile source emissions. We do anticipate, again, that one being published in August of this year. Next slide, please. Coordination between the state DOTs and MPOs is really going to be critical on these performance measures and on the target setting. We thought we would just pretty much point out the fact that performance rules will propose many elements that require coordination between the states and MPOs. We do expect the states and MPOs would work together. We do expect that they will use the existing 3C process that they have in place now. But we also expect states and MPOs to decide what will work for them, realizing that each state and MPO is unique. Keep in mind that within the NPRMs, we did propose that coordination between states and MPOs on certain performance management elements would be documented in the Metropolitan Planning Agreement. So a few of the areas that MPOs will coordinate with states on, we are looking at probably selecting and reporting targets. And we're going to talk a little bit about that now. Next slide, please. So real quick, for states target establishment, the states have a year after the effective date of the rule to establish targets. We proposed that statewide targets would be required. States would also have the option of setting any number of additional targets for urbanized and non-urbanized areas. And also states also will coordinate with the relevant MPOs on the selection of targets just to make sure that they're coordinated. And in some cases, we do realize that some of those MPOs cross state lines, and so that's where the coordination effort definitely will be needed between states and MPOs. Next slide, please. For MPO target establishment, we propose the targets will be, well, the law of MAP 21 requires that targets will be established no later than 180 days after the state has established their targets. The targets would need to be established for the entire metropolitan planning area, but the good thing is you would only have to do 4-year targets, whereas with the state, the proposal was to do 2- and 4-year targets. We would look at the MPOs coordinating with the relevant state DOTs on the selection of targets, just to make sure we have consistency to the maximum extent possible. MPOs do have the option of establishing their targets either by agreeing to plan a program or project so they contribute to the state target, or they could commit to their own quantifiable target for the metropolitan planning area. And since this doesn't require a lot of integration, we've asked Spencer Stevens to talk more about the integration of performance management with performance-based planning and coordination. Next slide, Spencer.
That you're going to need to implement with a performance management and performance-based planning approach. These 2 guidebooks are specifically intended to help staff at state DOTs, MPOs, transit operators, rural transportation planning organizations really find some useful information for developing a performance-based transportation plan. The first one, the Performance-Based Planning and Programming Guidebook that we put out in September of 2013, goes through and talks about what a performance-based planning and program concept is, gives some ideas of goals to walk you through that type of a process, has some keys to success, highlighting some really good practice that we found around the country, has some case studies to dig a little bit deeper into the detail, and then has a list of additional resources in the glossary to pull it even further together. The Model Long-Range Transportation Plan that we put together in June of 2014 really identifies those key components that we present in a model transportation plan again, as well as those elements that are going to help you to develop that type of a transportation planning process. We've run into a couple different processes that we're identifying and recommending. The first one is the pulling together, identifying your goals, your key performance measures, and your targets, and then kind of discussing where those existing system performance and identify and prioritize your set of investments. That's more typical with what we'd see with an MPO. There's some statewide long-range plans that also follow that approach. But a more strategic document or an alternative approach that we sometimes see by state DOTs on a statewide long-range plan is to set that direction for the investment decision by kind of laying out those goals again and the objectives and the performance targets, and then pulling things together so it's a family of performance-based plans that they're pulling together into one statewide long-range transportation plan. So I just wanted to take this opportunity with this audience to make sure we highlight those two publications and those two documents that are out there to help you through. I'll turn it back over to Francine.
Thank you, Spencer. And so Spencer has talked a little bit about what you do for integration. So looking at the next slide, let's talk a little bit about what the reporting requirements are. Our initial report, and your initial report has to be filed with Congress October 1st of 2016. And we have to talk in that report about the condition and the performance of the NHS, effectiveness of investment strategies for the state asset management plan, the progress the states have made towards their performance targets, and in particular talking about also the congestion at freight bottlenecks. Now, that is a requirement that is in MAP 21. It's under Section 150. That report will be due every 2 years. Next slide, please. The MPO also have a report that was established in MAP 21. Although they don't have to submit reports to FHWA, under our proposals, we ask that their targets and the progress on the targets will be reported in the states in a manner that is agreed upon and documented. And so in the MPRMs that we have published, we propose that this be done in the Metropolitan Planning Agreement. We did receive several comments talking about the Metropolitan Planning Agreement, and we will consider those comments in the development of our final rule. But FHWA also proposes that MPOs will report targets to the state DOT in a manner that would allow the state DOTs to provide those target information to FHWA upon request. And that includes both the targets any targets they agree to and any targets that the MPOs quantifiably develop for themselves. Once the targets are established, they will have to be included in the MPO's Metropolitan Transportation Plan, and they would also have to report baseline condition and performance, as well as progress towards achievement of their targets in the System Performance Report. And that is also part of your Metropolitan Performance Plan, and that's under the Planning Rule in Section 450. The tips that they would be producing will include a description of the anticipated effects of investment priorities in achieving the targets and link investments to the performance targets. Again, that is also in the Planning Rule. Next slide, please. So MPOs and reporting, some additional information that we wanted to share with you. MAP 21, Section 150 does require reporting by the state on progress in achieving state-established targets. We thought we would mention some additional guidance that we have been talking with states and MPOs with about making sure that the targets are developed in a collaborative process, making sure that achievement, working towards those targets is done in the collaborative process. We also said, again, that MPOs will report progress to the state in the Metropolitan Planning Agreement. And lastly, the MPOs should coordinate with the state on what achievement looks like and how they will want to measure it for the targets. Next slide, please. There is a final report that is required under MAP 21, and that's a report that we have to give to Congress within 5 years of being an enactment of MAP 21. And in that report, again, we will be looking at the effectiveness of the performance-based planning process and the ability to use this process as a tool to guide transportation investments. So we do have that report. That report is due in 2017, October 1st. Next slide. So I've just said a whole lot. Spencer said a lot. What you see here is a graphic. It's a quick visual of how we anticipate all the performance periods, the reporting, the significant progress determination that's required to happen. This is taken from the second notice of proposed rulemaking for the pavement and bridges, and you can find this graphic in that document. But it just does give you a quick outline of what we are thinking as far as performance reporting and target setting. Next slide. So just want to ask you to please remember to submit your comments. Although the comment period has closed on the first and second MPRMs, we do accept comments all the way up into the final rule, and we do consider them as much as we can possibly consider them. And comments are only official if we get them in the document, so we ask that make sure that you do submit any additional comments you have to the docket. So just want to bring you up to date real quick on some upcoming exchanges and webinars. Next slide, please. FHWA does have a what they call Let's Talk Performance, and we have 2 webinars coming up. One is on June 9th, and it's talking about fundamentals of transportation data analysis and usability, and then telling the performance story, how states can do that, and that's going to be in September. And you can register for those upcoming webinars on the website that you see listed there. So that is all that I have. So next slide, I want to thank you and turn it back over to Chris.
Okay, thank you, Francine and Spencer. A lot of very good information there. And I just want to remind everyone that if you do have a question for any of our panelists, please use the chat function on the webinar, and we'll get to those questions at the end of our webinar. So with that, let's move on to our first MPO presentation, who is Benjamin Brackett. He represents the Puget Sound Regional Council, which is the MPO for the Seattle-Tacoma region. Mr. Brackett has been with PSRC for over 10 years, and he is a senior planner in the agency's Transportation Planning Department, where he currently manages the Transportation Finance Program, the Development of State of Good Repair Planning Program, and shares in the responsibilities of the agency's mobility team. Most recently, Ben has focused on revenue forecasting, MAP 21 rulemaking, and working with the state to address draft performance-based planning requirements. So with that, Ben, take it away. Ben, I think you may still be on mute.
And this is Brian with AASHTO. I believe I sent you an audio pin. If you could enter that and then see if that takes you off mute. And then this is Brian again. I believe that code is hash 52 and hash sign again. And if this doesn't work, you can try calling back, and then I believe that should work.
Hello?
Hello, Ben, is that you?
Yeah, that's me.
Okay, well, it sounds like you've got the bully pulpit now.
Oh, great. Am I on?
You are on.
No. Fantastic. Well, you always hear about the webinar technical difficulties and think about how that can happen, and then it happens to you, and it's no big deal. So at any rate, sorry for the issue there. As Chris mentioned, my name is Benjamin Brackett with the Puget Sound Regional Council. Again, we are the greater federally designated metropolitan planning organization for the greater central Puget Sound region, which includes Seattle, Tacoma, and Everett, and again across the water over in Bremerton. So we have been working quite a bit for the last few years to develop a regional state of good repair program, largely in response to our own agencies and leadership's desire to get a better handle on what the costs associated with maintenance and preservation are in our region, and particularly in our long-range plan. So as a part of that, we were able to secure some resources from FHWA to do a project that in part set us up to move forward, and as a part of that program did this peer review, very short peer review with 4 agencies. So next slide, please. So just today, I just wanted to go over a little bit about PSRC and our increasing role in asset management and state of good repair. Just briefly touch on Map 21 and what it means, at least our interpretation about what it means for MPOs. Go into the program asset management program scoping project itself, and as a part of that was the peer MPO overview, and then go into a little bit about what we're what's on the horizon for us. So next slide, please. So PSRC has traditionally not been had very good estimates, and that's of state of good repair costs in our long-range plan. And over the last few years and the last few iterations of our plan, beginning in 2010, we've really started to make a concerted effort to get a better handle on that. And then finally, which is perhaps the most important piece here, in 2012, through our regional federal funding selection cycle, our boards created a pavement preservation set-aside. And that program has continued in 2014 and will again continue in 2016, or at least it's being debated and discussed by our boards right now. So we're starting to have this increasing role and sort of culminating in these funding distribution decisions. And so we're really trying to again, get a better handle on the costs and what the conditions are out there. And with so many jurisdictions and counties, it's very, very difficult for us, particularly since everybody's using either a different software or a different approach or something along those lines. So it's kind of a maze and different approaches, and we're trying to coordinate here. So next slide, please. So as Francine and Spencer mentioned, Map 21 obviously does have some implications for us and for other MPOs as far as changing our processes. Obviously, the performance-based planning program, which includes, as they mentioned, the bridge condition measures and targets, and some monitoring and progress assessment, as well as some reporting requirements. We have, our region particularly had a massive increase in the national highway system as a result of Map 21. And so, obviously, for those of you who are familiar with the new regulations, we'll need to be collecting data on a much larger percent of our regional transportation system. And then obviously there's the transit asset management component as well. Next slide, please. So I won't go into this too much because I think Francine and Spencer did a good job of this, but just really some high-level things that we see as it relates to us and our state of good repair planning is obviously the performance measures for bridges and pavements, which is in progress with the MAP 21, or excuse me, the NPRM, NPRM comment period that just closed. The incorporation of those into our long-range planning process, and perhaps the biggest piece for us is understanding how various levels of investment result or impact pavement conditions in the long-range plan. It's something that we really have traditionally never done, and is a big new piece for us. And then finally, the integration of the transit asset management plans. That's, I think, something that we're all waiting to see how it's going to play out, particularly since we haven't seen the rule from FTA yet. But understanding how that process as well factors into our long-range planning process is another issue for us. So the point is that we're really trying to get a handle on what the existing conditions are and how they change within the context of our long-range plan, as well as how we can support the evaluation of the pavement preservation set aside through our regional TIP. Next slide, please. So that brings us to the asset management program scoping project that was funded by the FHWA Invest program. For those of you that don't know that, I believe the acronym stands for Infrastructure Voluntary Evaluation Sustainability Tool, or something to that effect. But at any rate, we were selected as a pilot test for that program, which essentially asks each MPO or the participating agency to look at their plans and programs to evaluate the sustainability of their existing practices. And state of good repair was identified as one of the issues where we are scored rather lowly, and so when the opportunity came around to retest the tool against our updated plan, we were able to get some resources to evaluate or to look at ways that we can improve that and build upon what we had already been doing to enhance our existing efforts. So the purpose of the project was, again, to just kind of get an idea of what other agencies around the country are doing, which is what I'll just get into here in a minute, and eventually to establish these regional goals and to start to put us on, to set us up to move forward with a regional approach to asset management, not necessarily for local funding decisions, but just basically so we can have a better idea of it. And then finally, this would be the whole point of this is really to support the development of our next long-range plan update, which is in 2018. So next slide, please. So we took a look at 4 peer regions. Originally, we had a big long list of criteria that we were going to use to try to select our regions, things, look at agencies of similar size and makeup and sort of structural makeup to try to get similar agencies as to us to get a better idea. But one of our actually early findings was that not a lot of agencies and not a lot of MPOs have a real big role in asset management. So we were rather limited, not to say that they weren't great partners in this, but we were rather limited in our options here. So we ended up selecting Metropolitan Transportation Commission in San Francisco. Obviously, I think most people know about their really good program down there. The Regional Transportation Commission in Reno, and 2 MPOs in Michigan working under the same sort of structural, statewide structural issues. The Grand Valley Metropolitan Council and SEMCOG, the MPO for Greater Detroit region. So next slide, please. So some of the common features that we found here really were, first was a linkage, some creative links of asset management and pavement preservation, in particular to broader goals, broader regional goals. These are things like economic development, reducing wear and tear on vehicles, basic system performance, and really tying these pavement preservation issues into how do we, if we can better our pavement conditions and our bridge conditions, how will that be reflected in some of these other regional priorities? Stakeholder buy-in was really actually an interesting point for us, because we found that contrary to some of the issues that we're facing here, that often the other MPO local partner agencies simply had a common understanding and a common understanding of the benefit that a regional program would bring. So that's something that we're actually dealing with right now, and we're trying to bring folks along in our work. But it wasn't as big of an issue in some of these other places. I mentioned this, just touched on this, but there was a general focus on pavement and condition standards, I think largely because the bridge aspect is relatively well handled under the federal requirements. And the big theme that we came across through the whole process was data. You need to have a foundation of good and consistent data in order to be able to move forward with a regional program. Otherwise, you have holes that can actually be really detrimental to your work moving forward. Inventory and analysis software, oftentimes are at least the partners that we spoke with, they had common analysis software, be it MTC using StreetSaver, or folks in Michigan using Paver, MicroPaver, and Pazer, P-A-Z-R-S-E-R. And then finally, the distribution, or the ability to analyze those scenario analysis pieces in the long-range plan, which is obviously a huge part for us, particularly as it relates to MAP 21 requirements. So next slide, please. So some of the more unique aspects was, while they all had, all of our partner agencies here had integrated these asset management goals with other regional goals, they were not all the same. For example, some agencies used it as an economic development tool. Others integrated the pavement preservation program with like a complete streets type issue, as well as maybe perhaps tying the repaving programs into transit routes, heavily used transit routes, and things along those lines. So I think there's a broad swath of different types of angles one can take when communicating the benefit of a pavement preservation program in particular. There were different requirements for local participation, and in some cases it was actually required for the local agency or local city or county to provide data to the MPO as a precondition for receiving federal funding, as an eligibility requirement for federal funding. So that's obviously a very large incentive to do so. Oversight, there were different levels. There were either, they all had oversight committees, however, they could be either staff level or at the board level a little bit higher up. Funding, it could, and this is not to say funding distribution, this is really the source of funding. Oftentimes it was federal planning dollars in a combination with, excuse me, state contributions and additionally local sources of revenues that supported the data collection and planning functions of the program itself. The scope of the program, oftentimes it was limited to the federal aid highway program. Out of the 3 of the 4 partners, 3 of the limited their scope of their efforts to just the federal aid network, which I believe is akin to the National Highway System. Whereas one of our peer agencies incorporated everything, all the way down to collector streets. I think getting a handle on every little local road might be extremely difficult, even for a city or jurisdiction itself, let alone a multi-county, multi-agency region. And then finally, software. Obviously, not everybody's going to be on the same across the country using the same software, but I think again, within the region itself, it's very important, and it was communicated to be very important that everybody's on the same page for things like data compatibility and other advantages to having that. Next slide, please. So the biggest and perhaps most important, maybe not most important, but biggest difference was funding allocation. All of our partner agencies distributed funding for pavement preservation projects and pavement preservation purposes, but they often had differing models. There was 3 of the 4 models were an allocation to perhaps something like a county-wide group. And these resources, I should clarify, these resources were in some cases federal, some cases local. But 3 of the 4 agencies distributed those dollars to a county-wide group who would then pick and choose the projects that they would go to, oftentimes based on pavement ratings. And on the other side of the spectrum, one of our one of our peers was actually distributing the resources directly to projects that they were responsible for maintaining on their regional arterial routes. I believe that was actually Nevada, the Reno, Nevada region. So there are sort of two options here that you can kind of go about doing that. Next slide, please. So I think just to kind of wrap up here a little bit, some of the key takeaways we saw here, you can see, I'm not going to read them all, but really generating, I think, some of the highlights here are really generating broad-based stakeholder support through a value proposition, meaning, you know, what's the benefit for the local agencies, and that's something that we're dealing with right now, and we're trying to make that case, you know, that having better data and having a regional not oversight program, but a regional partner in this, and being able to look at some of these issues, more detailed asset management issues, and perhaps a broader perspective is a real advantage, and frankly floats all boats. Defining a program vision and goals is obviously a clear first step, and I think could go hand in hand with generating that stakeholder support. I mentioned clear and consistent data as a foundation. And sustainable program funding as well. You know, you're not going to, you know, Rome wasn't built in a day, and so you need to sort of build this thing up over a period of time, and so that requires obviously some year-over-year sustainable resources. Again, compatible data systems, and I think perhaps the first or the biggest lesson that we learned, and I think that I think bears across not only just pavement and asset management, but in a number of other planning areas and programs, is that this is no one-size-fits-all that fits. You know, you have to look at your own region and understand what your goals and objectives are as a region, and implement a program that meets those goals. And you can't just simply pick up a program from one region and drop it at another to achieve those goals itself. So, next slide, please. And so we finally, the last thing that we asked all of our partners was, you know, what are your big three tips here for anybody that's any other region that's looking to develop a program? And the first and the loudest tip was to start simple. You can't be everything to everybody all at one time at the very beginning. So you need to sort of get your basic nuts and bolts of your program in place, and then as you get better and better and better at that, say data collection, you know, if you're out there collecting pavement condition data, you know, maybe slowly start to expand that data collection to things like guardrails or signage or other types of things that would be pertinent in an asset management program, but you need to start out with your focused program. Two, again, going back to the consistent data structure and understanding and having compatible data systems was mentioned as a very important and critical piece. And then the development of dedicated revenues through a systematic process, basically meaning that you need to be able to carve out, again, some sustainable revenue over time and make that to make your program a reality. Next slide, please. And then as for us, as for Puget Sound Regional Council, our next steps here in the development of our program are to await the final rule expected in fall for the pavement and bridge preservation condition measures, and then to sort of build off that, build off those requirements to establish our regional goals and what we would like to accomplish here. Our boards had originally asked us to prepare some draft materials, a draft proposal, and we did that, and then they kind of backtracked and asked us to build off of what MAP 21 is going to actually require us to do and step off from there. We'll be continuing to build stakeholder support and identify local capabilities to support a regional program. Again, I mentioned we have 82 cities, 4 counties, 6 transit agencies in our region, all using perhaps not all, but many of them using different approaches and software and data collection methodologies. So we need to be able to get to understand what those differences are and perhaps bring those into alignment, or to select an approach that will be broad enough and broad-based enough to allow everybody to continue what they're doing at the local level and be able to turn that information into something useful at the regional level that can be combined with others. And I think software and data, identifying software and data tools goes hand in hand with that. And then generally we'll be defining our program sort of about this time next year once all these other things kind of come into play or fall into place. So next steps, or excuse me, next slide. And then this is my information, my contact information. Feel free to give me a call. And then our web page here, our State of Good Repair web page, which has a number of resources, including how we've incorporated the plan, or excuse me, State of Good Repair into the plan, the MAP 21 requirements. There's some staff summaries up there that I've prepared on the MPRMs. Both the Highway Asset Management Plan as well as the performance measures. There is a full report of the peer review as well as the broader INVEST program, if you're interested in that as well. And then some other links here to some local or regional or statewide pavement preservation agencies and web pages up there if you're interested in taking a look at that. So, and that's all I have.
Okay, thanks, Ben. And for those of you on the call, thank you for your patience as we work through some technical glitches. And so we're maybe a minute or two behind where we anticipate being. So let me jump right into introducing Jeff Neal from the North Central Texas Council of Governments, which is the MPO for the Dallas-Fort Worth region. Mr. Neal is a program manager with the Congestion Management and Innovative Project Delivery Team for NCT-COG. And he has been employed with them since 1999, and his primary work has consisted of planning, traffic modeling, value engineering, environmental review, and implementation processing for dozens of major freeway, toll road, HOV managed lane, and transit corridor projects throughout the Dallas-Fort Worth region. Since 2013, Mr. Neal has managed the Capital Operations Asset Management Program and is working with numerous local governments, regional transportation providers, and various state and federal entities to enhance the collection and analysis of infrastructure performance, condition assessments, benefiting project programming and prioritization for critical transportation facilities across North Central Texas. Mr. Neal holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Geography and a Master of Science degree in Regional and City Planning from the University of Oklahoma. Mr. Neal, is all yours.
Thank you very much, Chris. I hope everybody can hear me all right. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today about our Federal Highway Administration pilot study, and on behalf of FHWA and our project partners, I'm pleased to present to you this presentation. Next slide. So, as Chris had mentioned, we are really just beginning our process in developing an asset management program for our metropolitan area. And as we're developing it, we felt like it was important to get as firm and comprehensive of a grasp of the challenges and obstacles that we have in terms of developing this program and working with our many local governments and regional partners. So we felt it was important to begin by really knowing what the big picture of our region is. We are the 4th largest metropolitan area in the country. For a decade now, we've been the fastest growing. It looks like that trend is going to continue, seeing that we will continue to grow both population and employment-wise by nearly 50% between now and 2035. As a result of that, we see vehicle miles of travel and annual cost of congestion continuing to increase at even greater rates. But what's really important is that our current long-range transportation plan, Mobility 2035, the 2014 amendment, only identifies about 1/4 of the funding to eliminate the worst congestion in our various multimodal corridors between now and 2035. So with all of that said, of course, many burdens will remain on an existing system that's continuing to increase in its age and wear, exhibiting damage from accidents, affect various impacts that help to, or that cause problems with reliability and level of service. We also have a number of certainly changing demographics and changing economic situations that affect us, needing to take into account redevelopment and access needs. But in particular, where this presentation is concerned is changes in environmental conditions. Next slide. And that, of course, has resulted in our region, and certainly many others, when it comes to extreme weather and climate change, into many challenges, many impacts to mobility and functionality of the system. Anything from joint failures between pavement sections to utilities and pavements being shifted as a result of heavy rains, to even major fires throughout this region and many others. And so all of that has come together to create some significant challenges for this process. Next slide, please. So in keeping that in mind, we had applied for an FHWA grant to conduct a vulnerability assessment analysis for the Dallas-Fort Worth area. We chose to do this, of course, based on FHWA's vulnerability assessment framework, which you can see a diagram of that to the right of this slide. This had been developed through a previous round of pilot studies conducted back in 2010 with a number of DOTs and MPOs concentrated mostly along the along the coasts of our country. But with this particular round, they wanted to try to find some examples in more interior regions of the country, and we certainly qualify for that, of course. So in this process, we chose to look at a geographic area, a portion of our area consisting of the two core counties, Dallas and Tarrant County. We chose several important climate stressors that affect our region, periods of extreme heat, extreme drought, and then various heavy rain and flooding events. And the idea behind this process is we want to find a way, once we identify what additional risks these events pose to infrastructure, find the best way to be able to incorporate that into our typical data collection and planning processes for the region. Next slide. So we had a number of project partners assist us with this effort. We had the City of Dallas, particularly their streets and emergency management departments, provide us performance data on their streets and any kind of historical weather-related reports showing various impacts at particularly vulnerable locations. We also were assisted by the Fort Worth Transportation Authority, or the T. They partner with the Dallas Area Rapid Transit in providing our commuter rail service along the Trinity Railway Express. And so we were hoping to get some information regarding maintenance data and reports for that particular project, as well as their bus services. We were also able to get help from the University of Texas at Arlington, particularly their College of Geosciences, in which they were able to retrieve and help us analyze regional climate data, both historic data as well as projected data, and then also examine regional heat island intensity and the effects that might have on local climate and the transportation system in general. And then, of course, with our partners at TxDOT, identifying what exposure thresholds for these various climate stressors we need to be aware of, and trying as best as we can to begin to categorize ranges of facility effects that may happen. Next slide, please. So, of course, as we conducted this study, we saw that climate change, extreme weather, is a current problem. Although, as you can see, I was concentrating primarily on drought conditions, but as if many of you have heard the news over the last several months, that has changed in our region dramatically. But still, 8 of the top 10 warmest years in our area have occurred after 1998. In particular, the summer of 2011 was a very notable time in terms of extreme heat. We had 71 days of high temperatures greater than 100 degrees, but it was also interesting that we had 55 days where low temperatures did not go below 80 degrees. And as you'll see here in a moment on another slide, that also has some significant impacts for us. Last year, the total precipitation recorded for the Dallas-Fort Worth area was just over 21 inches. Our normal rainfall for the year is between 35 and 40 inches. So last year was our lowest annual total since 2005 and the 12th lowest in 115 years of record keeping. And this was just another year of a now, what was at that point, a 4-year-long drought in which deficits at many sites throughout the region were exceeding 40 inches. So more than a full year's worth of rainfall was missing at a number of locations until here just recently with the enormous amount of rainfall that we've had. We did have reservoir storage levels at about 60% capacity and some record low levels at lakes. In fact, going so low in some areas, as you can see in this photograph to the bottom right, that infrastructure that had once been completely submerged underwater, like an old highway bridge over a creek, were now completely exposed to the elements, where for a long time that had not occurred. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we found is there is indeed a very strong correlation between urban heat island intensities and drought severities. So if we indeed for a particular year have a strong heat island effect, that goes a long way into also worsening the drought conditions that are occurring. That can also be affected, various areas of influence where that's occurring can be based highly on wind patterns and certainly sprawl features, because the more urban development we have and the more impervious surfaces that are out there, that certainly affects the amount of heat that's retained in our region, particularly at night. In the summer of 2011, we saw some of those variations in temperature between urban areas and rural areas exceeding 10 degrees. That then translates to major differences in the effects of precipitation events, more severe rainfall occurring within urban areas, and of course that affects the drainage characteristics resulting from those storms. And all of that combines together in a cumulative way to diminish soil moisture across the region, which has a very big impact on subgrade materials for our infrastructure. And I'll talk more about that here in a moment. Next slide, please. So with the information that we received from the University of Texas at Arlington, that indicated that if business as usual remains, meaning that emissions remain relatively the same as it does today, that will ultimately translate to substantial average temperature rises and soil moisture reduction throughout the Dallas-Fort Worth area. We are likely to see mean temperature increases of as much as 8 degrees from what they are currently, and extremes by greater than 13 degrees by the end of the 21st century. We do anticipate that there will be lower annual rainfall overall, not by too much, but the interesting thing is that rainfall will come to us more in these very severe single storm events. So it will be kind of like a feast or famine condition for our region. All of that then translates into many additional transportation impacts, like the pictures that you all had seen earlier, including pavement rutting, cracking, joint failures, stresses on bridges and culverts, which reduces mobility and access, even additional to that which severe congestion, both recurring and non-recurring congestion that can occur. And of course that goes even farther to enhance the financial constraints that we have on maintenance and capacity improvements. We found that in the year 2011, with the extreme summer that we had, TxDOT across the state spent $21 million additional dollars out of their maintenance budget to be able to tackle the impacts that were caused by the extreme heat, drought, and fire conditions throughout the state. And so when you think about an amount like that for 1 year, translating that over to regions that will experience this level of impacts on a much larger scale, that's certainly something that we need to try to plan for as best as we can. Next slide, please. So we found that there were many critical roadway segments within the region in areas where they either cross a 100-year floodplain or they're in generally flood-prone areas. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get assistance with various engineering aspects or help understanding some of the design implications at these locations. We wanted to get more information like surface elevation, various design details to understand what the overall vulnerability in those areas are, but certainly understanding that a lot of critical facilities within our region, many of them on the national highway system, many of them are most heavily traveled facilities that happen to be crossing the floodplain. It's certainly important to know this and recognize that based on engineering information, if any one or several of these facilities were to be impacted or closed, resulting in detours and changes in level of service, it's certainly going to affect a number of other major corridors throughout the region. Next slide, please. I should also say that we not only performed this analysis for the area's roadway system, but we also conducted it for our passenger rail system as well. In this particular slide, we wanted to identify those facilities that were going to be vulnerable to heat risks. As you can see, even going from the year 2050 to 2100, we can see that increase in mean temperature, and again, in some cases by 8 or 9 degrees compared to what it is today. That suggests that there will be even greater extreme temperatures to occur, and that just exacerbates the degradation in pavement conditions. And then coupled with an enhanced heat island, it amplifies moisture losses, and in an area like ours, which has very high plasticity soils, that then causes a great deal of instability in subgrade materials, soil shifting, and you get this roller coaster effect on our area roadways where that happens, and that can cause some major problems for sure. Next slide, please. Now, one of the big things that we came to understand with this study is that there are an enormous amount of asset data available. Many of our local governments collect it, our transportation providers collect it. In fact, in the case of the city of Dallas, we understand that about 200,000 points of data are entered into their system. They're able to do biannual collections of asset data when it comes to their streets. So we certainly get a great deal of information, and we can see through this graph that there are difficulties happening right now, and it looks like those difficulties will grow worse in the future about trying to maintain a certain satisfactory rating for these streets. The problem is that even though this data exists, it can't address certain vital questions, like we can't tell if the degradation in street conditions is directly related to climate change or extreme weather. We can't see if any resiliency or adaptation measures have been applied to those areas, suggesting that there are improvements in those conditions. So where we can see that certainly there is a problem that's existing out there, and we can certainly correlate that with changes in extreme weather and, of course, with a rapidly growing region like ours, we can't really pinpoint the cause and be able to specifically address those symptoms. Next slide, please. We also were limited in our study because when you're looking at our most critical facilities and knowing that there are many major freeways, toll roads within our region, our primary focus ended up being on those major facilities as opposed to more lower volume thoroughfares and those that may be greater affected by certainly being located in flood-prone areas or in within 100-year floodplains, for example. However, since these certainly are our most critical and important assets, it was certainly beneficial to understand where those impacts may be. But certainly, we need to be more comprehensive in this type of analysis in the future. But also, the regional our regional size and the complexity of our system presents challenges too. We cover a 12-county metropolitan area, the second largest MPO in the nation. We have a total of 230 local government units within the region, including 3 districts of the Texas Department of Transportation, several transit providers, and so there's major differences in the record keeping that's occurring when it comes to asset information. So trying to collect that information, trying to draw linkages between them certainly presents a number of difficulties and challenges. Next slide, please. We also know that it's important to try to apply more engineering applications to fully understand how vulnerable our facilities are and what kind of adaptation or resiliency features need to occur in those areas. This map highlights what I explained earlier was the location of very high plasticity soils within the region. Certainly more focused on the east side throughout Dallas County, but also certain areas in Tarrant County on the west side have a lot of high shrink swell soils out there. And we know that, based on our experiences, that a number of applications are being used to address this, and they help mitigate some of the risks out there. But we still aren't fully sure just how frequent those measures are used, exactly how impacts are mitigated, and then how those measures affect budgets. We need to understand that information a lot more as we're trying to know what it takes to bring our system as closely as possible to a state of good repair. Next slide, please. So we see that we need to perform a great deal more coordination over in the future as we continue to build up our system. We certainly seek more discussion opportunities with our partner agency policy committees, our Regional Transportation Council, which is the decision-making body for the MPO, which consists of elected officials from cities and counties throughout the area. So we're trying to find opportunities to discuss this information with them, get more feedback and input. We're also working on additional follow-up activities from a very useful symposium that we had in Austin back in December of last year. In fact, one of the MPO in Austin was another participant within this pilot study, and they had put together this symposium consisting of a number of MPOs throughout the state of Texas, with the thought that more interaction, more coordination between us will help generate a more comprehensive strategy to help deal with these particular issues. We presented this study specifically at an adaptation and resiliency symposium in Arlington back in February. This information is being used as part of the state of Texas's application for the National Disaster Resiliency Competition. A lot of that is used by our emergency management departments, not only here at the Council of Governments, but other COGs and MPOs throughout the state. And then we've also taken time to speak with various 2-year and 4-year college faculty about our programs here, specifically through the Earth to Sky Partnership. And the idea here is to get more people realizing that climate change is more than just the numbers, more than just air chemistry. There are specific impacts and specific implications to everyday life that the more people that get involved in that activity and the more people who know about this, the greater our initiative to combat these issues will be. Next slide, please. And then particularly where our work is concerned here at NCT COG, we're incorporating this process now within asset management pilot studies that we're conducting on a number of different corridors throughout the region. Like the Puget Sound area, we were also awarded a grant opportunity through Invest, and so we're using that to evaluate various locally relevant resiliency strategies for our region. and incorporating that within our long-range transportation plan as much as possible. We also are certainly monitoring the rulemaking and everything occurring now through MAP 21 related to performance measures so that we can incorporate that as much as we can, but all still with the knowledge that applying all of this information to further maintenance and operations is, sometimes can be competing in a region like ours, knowing as fast as we're growing that we have to try as best as we can to balance our priorities between building capacity and maintaining our system, and knowing that at the same time also affects our region's air quality, as we are currently in a non-attainment area. So as we present all of these various issues together, their impacts and interactions with each other, we hope that this will help our decision makers develop processes that we can deal with these issues as effectively as possible. Next slide. So as we go forward, we're working as best as we can with local governments and transportation providers to ensure that we're configuring our asset databases in such a way that we can directly show the influence of climate change and extreme weather and how they affect performance measures and goal setting. We want to get access to improved modeling of hydrologic effects so that we can see areas where, certainly where urban sprawl is occurring, or where more dense development is occurring, so that there's a great deal more impervious surfaces, and find out how that affects drainage characteristics, and in turn, how does that impact our transportation facilities. We certainly want to take this opportunity to expand this assessment to the remainder of our metropolitan planning area, and we're continuing to monitor FHWA to see if perhaps an additional call for these projects will occur at some point in the near future. We also want to continue working with the University of Texas at Arlington and their Centers of Development Excellence, hoping for ways to update design methods and maintenance practices as much as possible with this improved focus on infrastructure resiliency and adaptation. And then see how that affects vulnerability within our region over time, and then also investigate how climate change and impacts among various modes within our transportation system changes our focus on investments. And again, this idea of balancing resources between maintaining the system and addressing congestion and the needs for additional capacity, knowing that between now and the year 2035, we will see 3 million more people arrive in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Next slide, please. And with that, this is my contact information if you have any comments or questions on this and any other activities we're performing regarding asset management. And if there are any questions, I look forward to responding to them today. And Chris, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. We are a little bit behind schedule, so let me just jump right into introducing our next panelist, which is Kathleen Sarli. She works for the Northeast Ohio Area-Wide Coordinating Agency, which is the MPO for the Cleveland, Ohio region. She has 22 years of experience in planning, design, and construction of infrastructure projects in Northeast Ohio. Kathy is a registered professional engineer with the state of Ohio and is currently serving as the Director of Planning at the Northeast Ohio Area-Wide Coordinating Agency. Previously, Kathy served as the Planning and Engineering Administrator for the Ohio Department of Transportation, District 3, and as the Major Projects Coordinator for ODOT, District 12. Kathy has a Bachelor of Civil Engineering from Cleveland State and a Master of Business Administration from Lake Erie College. So with no further ado, Kathy, take it away.
Hello. Since we're running behind, I'm going to run through some things really quickly. Next slide, please. I won't go over this too much, but just, NOACA is the MPO for the Cleveland, Ohio area. Next slide. We have many partners, local government, state government, federal government, business, nonprofits, neighboring MPOs. Next slide. I think we're all aware of our federal requirements, so I'll skip to the next slide. Our board is made up of 45 members, so it's a pretty large board, but very diverse. Next slide. NOACA's vision statement is that NOACA will strengthen regional cohesion, preserve existing infrastructure, and build a sustainable multimodal transportation system to support economic development and enhance quality of life in Northeast Ohio. Next slide, please. And so why do we need transportation asset management? Well, valuable assets are not receiving the attention or funding they needed to achieve a state of good repair, and it will allocate funding where it will provide the greatest return and improves performance, cost effectiveness, communication, accountability, and credibility. Next slide, please. Again, we have 5 counties. We have 166 cities, villages, and townships, population of about 2.1 million. We have 2 Ohio Department of Transportation districts and 6 transit agencies in our region. Next, please. We have a lot of assets, about 670 million, square feet of federal aid roadways, 1,700 lane miles of freeways, 5,500 lane miles of urban roads, 1,300 lane miles of rural roads, 55 miles of bike lanes, 260 miles of shared use paths, and over 3,000 bridges. Next slide, please. The current condition, though, of our assets, 33% of our pavements are not in a state of good repair, and it will cost about $1 billion to bring those into a state of good repair. And then about 11% of our bridges are not currently in a state of good repair, and the estimated cost to bring those up to good repair about $96 million annually. Next slide, please. This table here, the cost of doing nothing, it's just illustrating that you know, there really is a cost to doing nothing, and it just really illustrates that, you know, your buying power really decreases over time. So you really should do something, you know, in the present if you can. You know, your pavement condition rating, it degrades about 3 points a year approximately. That's very average, and so, you know, you'll lose a lot of points over the years, and you'll lose about $9 million. In this example, anyways, it started with 20 million. You'll lose about $9 million worth of future buying power. Next slide, please. So with all that information and with our surface transportation program annual allocation of only $27.5 million, we really needed a strategic framework for making cost-effective decisions about allocating resources and managing infrastructure. Next slide. So taking all of this information into consideration, NOACA committed to developing a comprehensive transportation asset management program to improve and sustain the condition of the highway infrastructure toward a state of good repair. And so as the asset management plan is under development, which will take about 18 to 24 months, we developed a provisional asset management program to address the region's critical pavement needs. Now, the provisional program is short-term, 2 years for state fiscal years 15 and 16, and it's focusing on pavement. And so not only will this policy or program allow the region's roads to be maintained in a state of good repair, it will also furnish critical information and experience that can be used in developing the long-term policy. So I'll go over the provisional program in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So every community in our 5-county region that maintains local federal aid roadways is eligible, and then plan elements directly related to pavement resurfacing are eligible for funding through this policy or program. Next slide. So what we did is, and this was a really a huge departure from how projects were normally selected. What we did is we actually selected projects ourselves, NOACA, using our regional pavement management system. We use that to prioritize projects based on a benefit analysis using the pavement condition rating, average daily traffic, the functional classification of the roadways, and connectivity values. We did not include the ODOT maintained routes, and only roadways with a PCR less than 75 were considered. And then NOACA partnered with the communities where these projects fell into to establish a final project list. And then the selected projects are following our normal NOACA process, which, the project review and, mending to the tip and that sort of thing. Next slide, please. So we decided that it would be a $40 million program over a 2-year period. And some of the ways that we were able to fund this program is we restructured or reorganized our TIP. And to explain that, it's a little bit confusing. What we did is we restructured the state infrastructure bank debt in the existing TIP. So ODOT, I assume other states probably have a similar program. They have a direct loan and bond financing program to maximize the use of federal and state funds in order to make direct loans to eligible projects. And then repayments from these loans are made to ODOT and then reloaned to subsequent projects, creating a revolving loan program. So NOACA currently has 7 projects that are planned for the SIB in the TIP. And so what had happened in the past is, since there was no early payment penalty, we started making payments much earlier than the program guidelines. But in reality, you're not required to make the repayments until the 19th month after loan closing. So really all we did is we just reorganized it so we were not making early payments, and it freed up, surprisingly, about $20 million. And so that resulted in us being able to fully fund the fiscal year 2015 projects, which totaled over $12.5 million. And then so that left us approximately $9.5 million, but unfortunately the remaining balance wasn't available in the fiscal years that we needed it. It was spread out kind of over the whole TIP. But it is adequate for debt service, so that's what we are going to be looking to the SIB to apply for the fiscal year 16 project. Next slide, please. There are some sponsor responsibilities for this program. They need to develop and design the project, and development of the plan, specifications, and estimate package. There's also a 20% local funding match requirement, and they're expected to move to construction prior to the close of the state fiscal year 2016, or they will not be eligible for this funding. Next slide, please. But while we were doing the provisional program, we were also working on the comprehensive long-term asset management program. So what we did is we released an RFP in April 2014, and we divided the project into 2 parts. Part 1 lays the foundation by completing an accurate asset inventory and condition assessment and recommending a pavement management system. And then Part 2 focuses on the development of the overall TAMP and explores the strategic efforts necessary to ensure its adoption and implementation. Next, please. Some key principles: needs to be strategic and proactive in approach, places a premium on data, information, and collaboration. In the previous presentations, I heard a lot of talk about the data. I mean, I think we must be lucky in Ohio. The Ohio Department of Transportation collects all of our pavement condition ratings for all of the federal aid roads in Ohio. So that's really great. They do the state system every year, and they do the local Fed aid system every 2 years. And they also inspect every bridge too, every year. Long-term and comprehensive view of infrastructure performance and costs. An explicit, visible, and transparent approach requiring effective communication among all stakeholders, and investment choices that are policy-driven with trade-offs among competing priorities. Next slide, please. So one of the first things we did after releasing the RFP is we formed a Transportation Asset Management Steering Committee, and that consists of engineers and planners from city and county government, ODOT, and Federal Highway. one of the first things they did was help us with the consultant selection. They guide the development of the TAMs, and they provide expertise for us. Next slide, please. So in July of 2014, Cambridge Systematics was selected and approved by the Board of Directors, and then there's just the project team from Cambridge, Applied Pavement Technology, and Dayton Associates. Next slide. Another thing that we did is we applied for an Accelerated Innovation Deployment, or AID, demonstration grant in July of 2014. And then in December of 2014, we were awarded that grant of $600,000. So that was really great for us to help us develop our plan. And just a side note, we were not eligible as an MPO to apply for this grant, but ODOT could apply on our behalf, and they did. So that was another great partnering opportunity. Next slide. And then kind of where we are right now, the project management plan is complete. The asset management self-assessment is complete. The draft asset register and condition assessment has been submitted. A gap analysis workshop was completed, and we are continuing to investigate pavement management systems. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, we do currently have a pavement management system, but it's old. I think it's from 1999, and it's not very flexible, and it's limited on what it can do, so we are really looking for something that can create scenarios and just do a lot more for us. Next slide, please. So some of the challenges, you know, we have a diverse region, you know, the urban, suburban, and rural. You know, the cities of Cleveland and Lorain are large urban centers, but we also have a large suburban area and a substantial rural area with a large Amish population. So, you know, each area has unique challenges and needs, which can sometimes be difficult to balance. The urban areas have more roadways, vehicle miles traveled, freight, employment centers, population. Some of our suburbs in our region are very old and have very old infrastructure, and metal Amish buggy wheels can really tear up a road in the rural areas. The next bullet is funding. I mean, that goes without saying. Funding is always a challenge, but I think we have found some innovative ways to fund our projects. And then, you know, I guess maybe just a little bit on the pavement management software. That didn't seem like it would be a difficult task, but it really has been difficult. It seems that most of the software companies are focused either, you know, one of two ways. Either they want to provide software to state DOTs who own vast amounts of infrastructure and have really large budgets, or they focus on more like operations management, which is more focused for cities or counties. You know, and since MPOs are kind of in a unique position where we really don't own any infrastructure, own or maintain it, but we are still responsible for planning, you know, in the region. So we have been, you know, looking at a lot of different software companies, and I think we found one actually. So, but it's been months and months and months. So just something to keep in mind if, you know, if you're looking for that for your MPOs. Next slide, please. And some of our successes, you know, ODOT and Federal Highway have been great to partner with. As far as ODOT's concerned, they are also developing their asset management plan at the same time, and NOACA, as well as other MPOs, are members of the asset management leadership team. So we provide input to that, and they keep us up to date. You know, receiving the AID grant was really great. That $600,000 is really helpful. It's given us a head start on MAP 21 performance planning requirements, and our board of directors' commitment to preserving existing infrastructure has been really great too. And that's really all. I went really fast, so hopefully you were able to get everything I said. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Karen. So now we'll quickly go into just a short Q&A time. I know that it's past 3:30, so we'll be able to take a few questions. Any more that you might have, please submit in the chat window, and we'll see that they are forwarded to the appropriate person. Again, these responses will be posted on the FHWA website, and this recording will also be available to you as well. And so the first question, and any of the panelists are free to contribute, is are MPOs required to have their own asset management plan under MAP 21?
Hi, this is Francine. No, MPOs are not required to have their own asset management plans under MAP 21. The requirement for asset management plans is only applicable to state DOTs. However, we are encouraging MPOs to work with their states in the development of their asset management plan, and maybe even consider developing their own asset management plan.
Okay, great. Second question is if an asset management plan is required by the MPOs, is it covered under the planning rule or the asset management rule or something else?
There is no requirement, as I stated before.
Okay, and then lastly, is a climate change study a requirement for the MPO asset management plan?
No.
Okay, great. Is there any other questions? Please submit them. If not, I'll just turn it back over to Chris.
Okay, thank you everyone for being a part of this webinar. We'd like to thank our panelists today. Some great information as MPOs explore this frontier about integrating asset management into our programs. One last reminder that this webinar has been recorded and will be posted to the AASHTO website, which is www.transportation.org. So thank you, and we hope everyone has a great afternoon.